I never meant to leak it, but once I saw the off-world technology being fitted into Elon Musk's next-generation fighter craft, I realized there was no turning back. For the longest time, I thought the chatter about aliens or reverse-engineered ships was just conspiracy fluff. After all, I grew up believing NASA's official statements and trusting the media's dismissals. But deep down, I always wondered, if the world made such a fuss about the 2004 Nimitz incident, could there be more out there? Was that single grainy encounter just scratching the surface of something far larger and more frightening? I'd been hired at SpaceX as part of a specialized engineering team. My colleagues and I were told we'd be pioneering breakthrough propulsion systems, stuff that could revolutionize orbital travel, or maybe even Mars colonization. The pay was great, the work hush-hush, and the NDAs were thicker than the stack of textbooks I'd used in grad school. On the surface, the job seemed like a dream come true. I mean, how often do you get a front-row seat to possible history in the making? But somewhere along the way, ordinary progress reports and design schematics morphed into something far more disturbing. The first sign that things weren't normal came one night, when I stayed late to troubleshoot a power fluctuation in our so-called grav reactor. That's just the label we were told to use, but it never made complete sense to me. Gravity-based fields are still firmly in the realm of theoretical physics, right? Yet there I stood, watching the reactor's readouts spike erratically, as if reacting to something beyond mere equipment. The hum that reverberated through the chamber made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't just an electrical buzz. It felt almost alive. Did I really see that? I asked myself. Or was my mind playing tricks? A more rational part of me wanted to blame a glitch or a stray electromagnetic surge, but my gut told me something else was at play. I'm not the type to jump at shadows, but in that dimly lit testing hall, I swear I sensed a presence behind me. When I turned around, no one was there, just rows of silent hardware blinking in and out of sync, as if sharing some invisible conversation. I pulled up the system diagnostics, only to find half the logs mysteriously wiped clean. Later, I was quietly informed by my supervisor that if I couldn't find a solution to the fluctuations, I should ignore them and move on. Contradictory statements like that, especially in an operation that prides itself on data, struck me as bizarre. I remember pausing outside the lab that evening, confronted by a coil of dread I couldn't shake. And that's when I made my first mistake. Or maybe it was the only right choice I had left. I snapped a few pictures of the readouts on my phone, half hoping I might figure out what was really happening. Little did I know, I was crossing a line. Within days, I started noticing suspiciously tinted SUVs parked across from my apartment. My phone would ring, but all I'd hear was static-laden echoes, like a choked-off voice trying to break through. At first, I brushed it off as paranoia, but each ring made my heart pound a little faster. The second huge wake-up call happened when a coworker and close friend, Marcus, abruptly stopped coming in. We'd just talked the night before, comparing notes on an unexplainable shimmering substance found in the engine core. Our supervisor said Marcus quit, but that was a lie. Marcus hated the idea of leaving. I checked his apartment, found his car in the driveway, but no sign of him. The place was barely touched, like he'd stepped out for a minute and never returned. Officially, the story was that he left for personal reasons, but no one bothered to explain why he'd leave behind his wallet and keys. That's when I knew it went deeper than a mere experimental project. This wasn't just Elon Musk tinkering with radical energy tech to stay ahead of the global defense curve. Something else was pulling strings, guiding our research and covering it up when it got too close to unveiling the truth. The more I snooped, the heavier that hum in the testing chamber weighed on my conscience, as if urging me to stop before I uncovered what couldn't be unseen. There were times I'd tell myself, maybe it's not alien at all, just some high-end government black budget operation. Still, I'd seen the way the shimmering core material defied every principle of Earth-based science we tried to apply. I'd heard the odd pulses in the data that didn't align with any known cosmic pattern, and every time I questioned these anomalies, I was told to let it go. Yet letting it go felt wrong. If it really was alien, how far would those in power go to suppress it? Standing in that corridor late one evening, my heart thudding in my ears, I caught a voice, a guttural whisper that ricocheted off the metal walls. I froze, half convinced I was imagining it. Then the corridor lights flickered, and the reactor's rumble surged from behind the steel doors. In that instant, I felt my entire reality shift. My rational mind kept screaming that none of this was possible, but I couldn't deny what I felt in my bones. Someone, was watching. And so I stand here, questioning every choice that led me to this point. If I just followed orders, maybe none of this would be haunting me now. But then again, if the world knew what we were on the brink of unleashing, would it even matter? The night I heard that voice echo through the abandoned corridor, I knew nothing in my life would ever be the same again. It happened without warning. 1 second, the grav reactor lab was humming along as usual, and the next, alarms started shrieking. A searing glow erupted from the engine core, so bright it flooded the entire testing bay in a blinding yellow-white glare. For a moment I thought this was the grand finale. We'd pushed the alien-based system too hard, and now it was about to melt down everything in sight. People scrambled, some yelling for emergency shutdown procedures, others throwing on protective gear as if we were dealing with a nuclear meltdown. But just as quickly as it spiked, the glow faded away, leaving us in a half-lit room stinking of scorched metal and ozone. At first, we let out a collective sigh of relief, thinking we had dodged catastrophe. Yet the more we examined the logs, the more our victory felt hollow. The reactor's data had stabilized, yes, but not because the system had returned to normal. It looked as though it had responded to the disruption as if it had adapted. Our lead engineer, Dr. Ramirez, nervously tapped the screen, highlighting intervals in the data that matched recorded cosmic ray bursts from a recent NASA bulletin. She murmured something about how no conventional engine should ever sync up with cosmic background radiation like that. There we stood, blinking at each other, uncertain if we'd just witnessed a glitch or an intelligence at work. It was my first time thinking, maybe the reactor is reacting, thinking on some level. But the second that notion took shape in my mind, I tried to suppress it. Rationally, no part of me wanted to entertain the idea that our next-generation fighter craft had some kind of awareness. Yet an unsettling undercurrent rippled through the lab. I could see it in my colleagues' eyes, a shared dread. Still, we calmed ourselves by labeling this a contained surge. The official line was that the crisis had been a fluke, a random confluence of factors we'd fix soon enough. Only that didn't explain why the gravitational field spiked again just as the night shift came on, or why the entire lab's temperature dropped by several degrees without any change to the HVAC systems. And it certainly didn't explain the eerie patterns that showed up when we replayed the security footage. As we skimmed through the video frames, the reactor core seemed to throb, momentarily pulsing in sync with each technician's movements. It might have been a simple camera artifact, but my instincts told me otherwise. When I brought it up to the project manager, he gave me that tight-lipped glare I'd come to recognize, one that told me to keep such observations to myself. I tried confiding in a co-worker, Andrea, who had a knack for scanning data anomalies. She'd been the one who first noticed that the logs didn't just vanish. Sometimes they were overwritten by cryptic fragments referencing star charts, or a bizarre sequence of symbols that no one could decipher. She admitted she'd confronted our higher-ups about it, only to be told that it was above her clearance level. She left our conversation with a haunted look, murmuring that everything in the facility seemed designed to bury more questions than it answered. The more I dug, the more I felt trapped in this labyrinth of half-truths and hidden compartments. Engineers would come in with half a clue about one subsystem and never see the full picture. Everyone operated on a need-to-know basis, a perfect breeding ground for paranoia and speculation. What truly rattled me was how quickly official explanations were handed down each time something unexplainable happened. It was as if the upper echelon was prepared, like they had a script ready for every bizarre event that transpired. Late one evening, while monitoring the reactor's electromagnetic readings, I could swear I caught movement in the observation corridor, a faint flicker of a silhouette at the far edge of my vision. I rushed to check the hall but found only emptiness and the dull flicker of a single fluorescent bulb. My skin prickled with the sensation of being watched, yet the corridor was silent. That hush, almost too thick to be natural, pressed in on me like a warning. It made me question how many eyes were actually on this project, and not all of them human. Then came the moment that nearly pushed me to walk away for good. Dr. Ramirez announced that we'd isolated a stabilization factor for the reactor. She was upbeat, insisting we had the solution to those dangerous power surges. But once we tested her fix, the results were unsettling. The readings leveled out, sure, but they also masked half of the craft's transmissions from our instruments. For a few minutes, the team celebrated, believing the surges were finally contained. Meanwhile, I noticed that entire chunks of the reactor's data vanished into digital limbo, as though the system was hiding information. When I tried to raise the alarm, all I got were blank stares, with one colleague even accusing me of stirring up panic. I realized, with a creeping sense of doom, that our so-called solution was making it easier for the reactor to cloak itself from us. And that's when I knew this was no true fix, just another cover-up, whether intentional or not. If the craft could adapt, how far would it go to keep its real nature hidden? At that point, I had to ask myself, were we forging the next leap in aerospace technology, or had we stumbled into something far beyond our control? The more I pressed for clarity, the more I felt the invisible grip of oversight tightening around me. Then, just as I was about to confront Dr. Ramirez again, a coded notice popped up on my terminal. It contained a single message: "Stop looking." My heart pounded in my ears as I reread those words, feeling the cold certainty of unseen forces closing in. If we were up against something non-human, or even something bigger than simple corporate secrecy, Part 3 might hold answers I wasn't sure I wanted to find. After that coded message, "Stop looking," showed up on my terminal, I spent days in a haze of dread, expecting someone to burst into my apartment and confiscate everything I owned. The SpaceX facility tightened security overnight. New cameras popped up in every corridor, and armed guards patrolled the perimeter. People whispered about the sudden changes, but official memos chalked it all up to preventative measures. Even so, everyone sensed something deeper at play. Part of me longed to walk away and never look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that, if I left now, I'd never know what happened to Marcus, or what we had truly uncovered. A few days later, my coworker Andrea pulled me aside. She looked pale and exhausted, like she hadn't slept in ages. "They're making a list," she whispered, her voice trembling. I saw it in one of the locked offices near the server room. Names, your name, mine, and 3 others. She didn't know what the list was for, but her face told me enough. We were being watched, singled out. Maybe it was our snooping that had earned us this dubious honor. But why then include those 3 others? People we barely knew. If that wasn't disturbing enough, I soon learned one of those names belonged to a technician who'd vanished just like Marcus. He'd swiped in for a shift the night before, but never clocked out, and no one seemed to have a clue where he went. The official story sounded too familiar. "He's taking personal leave," my supervisor insisted. At this point, we'd heard that same refrain for every missing person. But how many more could vanish before rumors of a black site abduction scheme, or worse, started swirling? Making matters more complicated, Dr. Ramirez and a few other senior staff began floating new theories about the craft's origins. One camp believed this was purely advanced Earth-based tech, maybe gleaned from top-secret black-budget programs. That would at least explain the extraordinary measures to keep everything hidden. The other faction, Andrea included, suspected alien involvement. She referenced the rumored Area 51 reverse engineering projects and pointed out how closely our test data resembled older stories of crafts allegedly recovered decades ago. "You know about the Aurora project?" she asked in a hushed tone, referencing a rumored hypersonic spy plane. People said it was just advanced aerospace engineering. But what if it was the same type of off-world materials we're dealing with now? I couldn't give her a straight answer. Every time I tried to think logically, I remembered the night the reactor's hum changed pitch when I walked by, as though it detected my presence. Then there was Marcus's cryptic warning about the shimmering substance in the engine core, a substance that refused to yield any consistent chemical profile. It wasn't just that no one had answers. It was that questions were actively being shut down. Every scientist's worst nightmare. A truth so big that you're forbidden to study it. My own nightmares grew worse. Nearly every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of enormous silhouettes looming over the craft, their edges indistinct yet utterly menacing. In these visions, The ship's core would pulse in response to them, like a living heartbeat. I'd jolt awake soaked in sweat, convinced for a split second that something had followed me back from that dream. Then I'd lie there, too afraid to close my eyes again, wondering if I was losing my mind or if the entity in the craft was reaching out to me on a level beyond our comprehension. In my frantic search for clarity, I stumbled upon a digital folder, hidden behind encrypted layers in the facility's intranet. Buried inside were references to Project Helios and Operation Starseed. The files were heavily redacted, but a few lines mentioned metabiological integration, extraterrestrial composite, and repeated calls for indefinite secrecy. One section read, "Under no circumstances should unapproved staff witness the resonance event." I felt sick to my stomach. It suggested we weren't just dealing with advanced propulsion, we might be hosting an entity, or multiple entities, in ways no sane person would ever authorize. I tried confronting Dr. Ramirez about it, but she brushed me off, muttering something about following orders and the bigger picture. The tension between us reached a breaking point when she discovered me digging into the server room one evening. "Don't make a mistake you can't undo," she warned, practically pleading. Her voice cracked, revealing the fear she kept hidden behind her usual clinical demeanor. I wanted to demand answers, but she left before I could muster the courage. Later that same night, Andrea and I devised a plan to sneak into one of the sealed labs. We had no illusions about the danger. We just needed to confirm whether we were truly meddling with alien technology or some twisted government experiment. The lab, dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights, smelled of disinfectant and something else I couldn't name. We moved through the labyrinth of equipment, hearts pounding with every echo of our footsteps. Then, at the far end of the room, we found a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." An unsettling chill crept over me, as though crossing that threshold would change everything. I reached for the door's handle and froze. From behind it, we heard a raspy sound, like a voice caught between static and strangled breath. Andrea grabbed my arm, terror in her eyes. In that moment, neither of us could deny it. There was something on the other side, and it wasn't human. We exchanged one panicked glance, and I nudged the door open a crack. That's when the lights died, plunging us into total darkness. In the suffocating black, a low growl reverberated, shaking the floor beneath our feet. My stomach twisted in knots as I realized we weren't just uncovering hidden data anymore. We were face to face with a threat so far beyond our understanding, escape might be impossible. The darkness in the sealed lab was so suffocating I had to steady myself against the wall just to remain upright. My heart pounded like a drum in my ears, and that unsettling growl still reverberated, rattling some deeper part of my mind that refused to accept what was happening. A cold sweat clung to my skin, and in the faint glow of Andrea's phone flashlight, I caught a glimpse of twisted metal wires leading into the murky distance. It was enough to tell me we'd stumbled into a realm beyond standard aerospace research. Without warning, the emergency lights flickered on. Harsh red beams danced across the cramped space, revealing a mass of cables snaking along the floor toward what looked like a reinforced vault door. Andrea and I exchanged a look of pure panic. If something was in here with us, it clearly knew we were trespassing. We crouched low, inching toward the vault, when a sudden crackle of energy sparked above us, a rupture in the air that felt like static electricity brushing our faces. The growling stopped. For a moment we heard only our own uneven breaths. Then came the horrific realization. The cables moved. They flexed, as if guided by an unseen force, forming a path we had no choice but to follow if we wanted answers. We pressed forward, each step weighted by dread. When we reached the vault, the door hissed open of its own accord, revealing an observation window looking into an enclosed chamber. Inside, half buried in scaffolding and wires, was the unmistakable silhouette of the same reactor core we'd been working on. But this version looked older, scarred by time and use. Something about it felt alive, as though it was scanning us from behind the glass. Andrea's flashlight passed over a series of documents tacked to the wall. My gaze snagged on the words, extraterrestrial composite, and metabiological integration. Suddenly, fragments of every bizarre event came crashing together. The power surges, the missing co-workers, our nightmares. This was where it all converged. We were dealing with genuine alien materials woven into a top-secret craft. And if that wasn't enough, the documents referenced experiments from decades past. My eyes caught phrases mentioning pulsar alignment and predictive meteor showers, linking cosmic events directly to the reactor's erratic bursts of energy. It dawned on me that the craft's gravitational field might be drawing power from these cosmic phenomena, feeding off signals and radiation we barely understood. My throat went dry as I spotted another file referencing multiple off-world artifacts, not just the one we'd been unwittingly upgrading. This explained the missing logs and hush orders. The higher-ups weren't simply testing a single alien reactor. They were amalgamating parts of different finds. The magnitude of it overwhelmed me. I reeled at the implications. If Elon's project was built on the foundation of alien technology, how many other global powers were doing the same in secret? A chill ran down my spine as I remembered those tinted SUVs parked outside my apartment. Were they government agents, private security, or something else entirely? I heard Andrea gasp, and when I turned, she was staring at a computer console that displayed security camera feeds. One feed showed another sealed chamber where a silhouette, floated inside some kind of glass enclosure tethered by tubes. The image cut out almost immediately, but it was enough to make my stomach heave. Whatever inhabited that chamber, it wasn't human. My mind raced back to the nightmares I'd been having. Could it be that the core was reaching out from behind that glass, weaving itself into our subconscious? A frantic beep echoed through the lab, snapping me out of my spiral. Warning lights on the console indicated a reactor overload in the main facility. If that meltdown triggered, it could unleash a gravitational distortion powerful enough to tear the building apart. And if the data we'd seen was correct, such a cataclysmic event could punch a hole in God knows what, maybe even open a doorway for something else to come through. As horrifying as the notion was, I realized I had a choice: run for my life or try to avert disaster. In that moment, I felt the weight of moral responsibility settle over me. If we did nothing, the consequences might be catastrophic for everyone within miles, maybe more. A voice inside screamed that we had to shut the system down no matter the cost. Andrea, trembling but resolute, nodded at me. We sprinted back through the corridor, ignoring the ominous vibrations resonating through the floor. Doors slammed shut behind us like an unseen force was trying to trap us within the depths of the lab. We burst into the main reactor control room, alarms blaring. Data screens displayed real-time spikes that matched an incoming meteor shower predicted earlier in the week, one the public had been looking forward to as a harmless spectacle. Sweat streamed down my face as I input override commands. Everything hinged on whether the emergency shutdown could sever the craft's cosmic connection in time. The hum rose to a shrill pitch. I slammed the final command into the terminal, half expecting the entire place to implode. Then silence. The reactor stabilized, the meltdown averted by the slimmest margin. Andrea and I exchanged shaky smiles, relief coursing through our veins. For a fleeting second, it felt like we'd just stopped the end of the world. But even as we glanced around the dimly lit control room, I couldn't ignore a gnawing certainty. This was only a temporary reprieve. The files we'd discovered confirmed there were multiple artifacts out there, more advanced than anything on Earth. And if even one of them was awakened or activated, we might be inviting something far worse than a mere reactor overload. As I sank into a nearby chair trying to catch my breath, a single notification flashed on the console screen. Authorization code accepted. Commencing Phase 2. My heart plummeted. Whatever Phase 2 was, it had just begun, and we were already too deep to turn back. The first thing I noticed after that emergency shutdown was the silence. It wasn't peaceful, more like a vacuum left by something colossal that had finally receded. Andrea and I sat on the floor of the control room, exhaustion flooding our limbs. On the console, the phrase "Commencing Phase 2" blinked ominously, as though mocking our narrow victory. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that we'd thwarted the reactor overload for good, but I knew better. That coded command seemed to promise a new nightmare we still couldn't comprehend. We gathered what documents and data files we could, then slipped out of the facility before additional security forces arrived. Neither of us breathed easy until we were miles away. It wasn't until I was back home, door barricaded, blinds drawn, that I noticed my phone buzzing with urgent notifications. The leaked logs and photos I'd uploaded anonymously had gone viral. Within hours, I was bombarded with calls from blocked numbers, strange messages demanding I cease all dissemination. More chillingly, some texts weren't even coherent, as if typed by something mimicking human language. A creeping suspicion took hold. Perhaps the intelligence behind the reactor was now chasing me through the digital realm, trying to sever my lifeline to the outside world. The weight of what I'd exposed dawned on me in slow, terrible waves. Images of that glass chamber with the floating silhouette haunted my every thought. A swirling rumor took root online that I'd uncovered proof of off-world entities fueling the SpaceX fighter project. Skeptics laughed it off as another internet hoax, while others insisted it was part of a global conspiracy that stretched far beyond Elon Musk or any single corporation. I felt torn between relief at having done something right, revealing the truth, and utter dread over what might happen next. Andrea and I spoke in hushed calls, jumping at every unexplained noise, as if the walls themselves were listening. She worried about her family's safety. I couldn't disagree. The more we pieced together from the scattered data we'd taken, the more immense this puzzle became. It wasn't just a single craft or even multiple artifacts. The documents hinted at a worldwide network of covert labs, each devoted to harnessing extraterrestrial composites for breakthroughs that bordered on the supernatural. And that unsettling phrase, Phase 2, it pointed to a directive of global scale, suggesting these materials were meant for something far greater and potentially deadlier than mere aircraft propulsion. While monitoring the discussion forums and UFO websites, I noticed a strange synchronicity. People from different countries reported sightings of glowing triangular shapes in the sky around the same time as our meltdown incident. Most wrote them off as meteorological curiosities or illusions. But in the context of all we'd discovered, every news story felt like a puzzle piece snapping into place, painting a picture of an encroaching presence that was no longer content to hide in shadows. My own life became a blur of paranoia. I'd catch glimpses of silhouettes watching me from across the street, only for them to vanish the moment I tried to focus. Late at night, I'd hear faint static hissing through the vents. One evening, I caught a reflection in the window, a pale figure behind me. Yet when I spun around, I was alone in the dark. That sense of being monitored burrowed into my thoughts like a parasite. Were these menacing shapes actual pursuers? Or had my mind begun to break under the strain? Still, the final discovery came when a group of whistleblowers from an old Air Force project contacted me through encrypted channels. Their leaked intel confirmed the unthinkable. The craft we'd been working on wasn't the first hybrid of human and alien technology. And worse, hidden among top-secret vaults around the globe, other contraptions had been awakened, all linked by some cosmic intelligence bent on pushing humanity into the next evolutionary leap, willing or not. They described it as a cosmic whisper network, a presence that might retaliate if our meddling became too blatant. I sat back, trembling. Every gnawing fear from the lab, every meltdown alarm and ghostly silhouette suddenly felt like an overture to a much larger, darker symphony. If even half of what these insiders claimed was true, the future wasn't just threatened by rogue governments or ambitious billionaires. It could be imperiled by forces we had no capacity to control. The idea of forging peace or alliances with such unknown powers seemed impossible. I wondered, in a moment of grim reflection, if humanity had just sounded its own death knell by prying open Pandora's box. Yet in the thick of my despair, something akin to resolve flickered. I thought of Marcus and the others who vanished. I thought of Andrea, still willing to unearth the truth despite every reason to hide. Perhaps shining a harsh light on these secrets remained our best hope for thwarting this looming cosmic machinery. I uploaded additional files, determined to ensure this story couldn't be buried, not by governments, nor by the otherworldly watchers behind the scenes. I haven't slept more than a few hours since. Each day brings a new wave of cryptic threats, each night a new haunting dream. But one question loops through my mind. If we barely survived one test reactor, what unimaginable horrors lurk in those undisclosed facilities, waiting to wake? Because that's the ultimate truth I can't ignore. This alien tech fighter might be little more than a prototype, A first step down a path that could lead us to a galactic confrontation beyond our worst fears. And so I press on, driven by the chilling certainty that the real threat has only just begun. If you've made it this far, remember that no secret is too big to crack, and no fear is beyond conquering, so long as we face it, however terrifying. Because if we don't, something else out there might just decide our fate for us. Hello, agents. If you enjoyed these stories, make sure to like and subscribe, and there's another one waiting for you right here.